Okay. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. And I know with the time change, it's a little tricky, but I really deeply appreciate those of you who are able to make it. And hopefully, um, this shiur, I think, is being recorded. And so for those who aren't able to make it, then hopefully some will get a chance to hear it before Purim, because today's shiur is a little different. It's not in keeping with the series. The series wrapped last week, the series on the deep backstories of Megillat Esther. But this this shiur is looking at a place as the nexus for a deeper understanding of the holiday of Purim. And the place of Purim is as the first year I believe that I ever gave it that I gave in for Torah in Motion on Hanukkah was about the place of Hanukkah, and that is Modi'in. But the place of Purim is Shushan. And so we'll be talking a little bit about the geography of Shushan. But first, I'd just like to see how the place of Shushan is expressed in Megillat Esther. And we'll just look at a couple of selections, even though Shushan is mentioned over and over again, because that's the context, that's the place where the story unfolds. Let's see how in the text, I'm just trying to get rid of this. There we go. How in the text it's really described in two different ways. And it's these two ways that we're going to encounter over and over again. And if you look in your concordancia and your concordance under Shushan, then you'll see that most of the times that Shushan is referenced is either as Shushan Habira or Ha'ir Shushan. Shushan Habira, meaning the capital Shushan, or Ir Shushan, the city of Shushan. So let's look at a couple of examples together. The first one's in the third chapter of Esther that I bring here. And I only bring these examples because in these two examples, the first two, we have both terms for Shushan mentioned in the same verse. So if we look at the third chapter of Esther, the 15th verse, Haratzim yatsu dechufim b'dvar hamelech, you can almost, in the pulse of the verse, you can hear the stomping of the horse's hooves. I love that. Haratzim yatsu dechufim b'dvar hamelech, hadat nitna b'Shushan habira, and the decree was given in Shushan, the capital. V'hamelech v'Haman yashvu lishtot, and the king, meaning Achashverosh and Haman, sat down to feast. V'ha'ir Shushan navocha, and the city of Shushan was bewildered. Here translated as dumbfounded, but I prefer bewildered. So here we see these two expressions of Shushan Habira, the capital city Shushan, or maybe the palace of Shushan, the court of Shushan, excuse me, as the Ibn Ezra in his commentary on the second verse of the first chapter, when Shushan is first mentioned in Megillat Esther, in Shushan Habira, he explains that Shushan Habira means the palace, where the decrees would have been decided upon and decreed. And Ha'ir Shushan represents the population, represents the people of at least of the immediate vicinity of the palace. And we see the same duality expressed later on in the 8th chapter of Esther, again with that same pulsing beat, because we have a redo of the couriers being sent out. Haratzim rochlei harechesh, this word always trips me up. Ha'achash tiranim, yatsu mevohalim u'tuchufim b'devar hamelech. I once had a course as an undergrad, and it was a couple of courses in the language of the Bible, and there was about half a semester devoted to the language of Esther and the Persian, or not specifically Esther, but certain works where there were clear loan words. Like you'll have a lot of Egyptian loan words surrounding the whole story of Israelites in their shiabud, their enslavement in Egypt. You'll see a lot of Egyptian loan words, and here you'll see many Persian loan words in the Megillah, including achashtranim. They are just flying forth. It's like that scene in Cinderella for those who see a lot of Disney movies, you know, that just flying forth. B'dvar hamelech v'hadat nitna b'Shushan habira. Again, the same language of the decree being given in Shushan Habira. ומרדכי יצא מלפני המלך בלבוש מלכות תכלת וחור ועטרת זהב גדולה ותכריך בוץ וארגמן. And Mordechai comes out in his full arraignment of glorious royal robes. V'ha'ir Shushan ta'ala v'samecha. And here V'ha'ir Shushan, representing perhaps a different element of Shushan, is instead of being navocha, instead of being all bewildered, now it rang with joyous cries. It was a joyous scene to behold. Now, this duality of Shushan Habira and Ha'ir Shushan is picked up by the Alshich, and the Alshich, who I believe 16th century commentary. He wrote a commentary on all of Tanakh, and he writes the following: Hinei shtei ayarot smuchot zo lezo. There were essentially two different regions or two different areas that were adjacent to each other. V'orkoma demaya haya over b'neihem. And there was a pathway of water. There was a waterway that passed between them, umafridan, and separated between these two regions. Achat nikret Shushan Habira. One region was called Shushan Habira. Sham moshav hamelech v'hasarim ve'en reshut liyudim lador sham. There was the court, and Jews had no access to Shushan Habira. Vashniya nikret Ir Shushan. And the second region was called Ir Shushan. So we have Shushan Habira and Ir Shushan. K'moshe katuv, Va'ir Shushan Navocha, Va'ir Shushan Tzahala. Like we see these examples of specifically Ha'ir Shushan. Visham Darim Yehudim Rabim. And there lived many Jews. Now he's picking up here on the commentary of the Ibn Ezra, which I did not bring for you, but as I mentioned, had identified Shushan Habira as the palace, and Ha'ir Shushan being a place where there was a large Jewish population. Mordechai was the only Jew who was allowed into the palace compound or into Shushan Habira, a court Jew, one can say. Because he was very highly pedigreed, as we know from the pedigree that is delivered to us in the Megillah. And you recall that there were two waves of exile that the Babylonians effected on the Jewish community in Judea. The first in 597 were all of the elite, the Choreshu Masker, as they're called, Sarei Yehuda, the princes or the officers of Yehuda, and Mordechai was among their ranks. So he was recognized even in the Persian court as a VIP, as one who was kind of grandfathered into office, one can say, as the leader of the Jews, and so he was allowed access to Shushan Habira. Shushan Habira. So the Alshich is being very clever here, saying Ish Belashon Yachid. There was one Jew, Ish Yehudi Echad Hayab Shushan Habira. Only one Jew was allowed into Shushan Habira, and that would be Mordechai. Now, this idea of the palace being the place where which is known as Shushan Habira, over and against Ha'ir Shushan, is a concept that I'd like to develop a little bit further. And I'd like to start with a fundamental idea that I think many are familiar with. The idea that God is not in the Megillah, but a great deal of our avodat hayom, one can say, of what we are charged to do by Purim and through Purim is to, one can say, find God where he is not overtly evident. So the Maharal will pick up this idea in a very specific sense with them, which I'm sure many have heard before. It's an idea of the Arizal as well. אמנם אשר נראה ברור כי אחשוורוש, מפני שהיה מולך בכל העולם. Achashverosh, who ruled over a massive kingdom, right? 127 different provinces. And so he is, and he called himself by this, by the way, all the Persian kings called themselves rulers of the entire world, perhaps of the entire known world, of the world that they were willing to explore. Ulekach malchuto shehu malchut da'ara, and therefore his flesh and blood in this world kingdom, in a sense, ke'en malchuta d'rakia, it represented the heavens, in that it wasn't a limited kingdom. It wasn't small and defined over it against other kingdoms. It swallowed up the entire known world, one can say, at least in the thought, the tfisa olamit, the thought world of the ancient world. So the parallel to Malchuta De'ara of Persia, of Malchuta De'ara meaning the kingdom of this world, the earthly kingdom, would be the heavenly kingdom. No other kingdom was as vast that could best express the vastness of the heavenly kingdom. And so the Maharal says the entire feast that he had arranged was essentially to claim kingship, ultimate kingship over the entire world, but in more, let's say, Kabbalistic thought, it was essentially claiming kingship over all that is known. And the idea is expressed even further in the Zohar here. And when Esther was standing in the inner courtyard opposite the palace, this is a verse that the Zohar uses to explain that anytime, and this is also a popular idea that you might be familiar with, anytime that we just have the term Hamelech without the qualifier Achashverosh, but just Hamelech, just the term Hamelech Stam, Da Kudsha B'richu. So you can, in a sense, the Zohar is instructing us, and the Maharal is furthering along for us. You can, in a sense, find God in the Megillah, in Hamelech, in those soft allusions, in reading carefully between the lines. And so it's not a game to say anytime you see just Hamelech, you should be thinking of God. The trigger is that Achashverosh isn't mentioned, and Hamelech carries with it the possibility that we could be thinking beyond the local story. The vastness of Persia carries with it the possibility that we could be thinking beyond Malchuta Da'ara, the earthly realm, and we can be thinking about the heavenly realm. As we saw, I discussed in an earlier shiur on Moshe, when I brought this Gemara on Chulin, Esther min haTorah minayin, v'anochi haster astir. Esther's whole concept in the Torah is revealing that which is hidden. Legalot et hester, Megillat Esther. God is hidden, so search deeply for him. Whether it is in the kingdom of Persia, whether it is in the person of Hamelech, he is, in a sense, to be found in the Megillah. So what does any of this have to do with the duality of Shushan Habira and Ha'ir Shushan? I'd like to hold that question for a minute, because I think it'll become abundantly clear in just maybe not a minute, maybe a few minutes, as we look at the subsequent sources. Just remember, again, that our link to this whole concept of the duality of the kingdom of Persia and Malchuta Derakia, meaning the Malchuta Da'ara, the kingdom of Persia, with the Malchuta Derakia, the kingdom of heaven, and Hamelech Achashverosh with Hamelech is something to keep in mind as I develop the idea of this duality of Shushan Habira versus Ha'ir Shushan. It'll hopefully all become clear in just a little bit. Shushan is not only mentioned in Megillat Esther. It is mentioned elsewhere in Tanakh, in the book of Nehemiah, in the book of Daniel. Daniel being the chronicle of the first exile experience after the destruction of the first temple, when the Jews were brought into Babylonia. And Daniel is the one who is charged with understanding Nebuchadnezzar's dreams and visions. Nebuchadnezzar, the evil king, who was responsible for exiling the Jewish community and destroying the first temple. Daniel he both understood Nebuchadnezzar's dreams and interpreted Nebuchadnezzar's dreams, reminded Nebuchadnezzar what he had dreamed. And here in the 8th chapter of Daniel, so he's already moving along in the Babylonian king list. He's on Nebuchadnezzar's grandson, or some say great-grandson, Belshazzar. I myself had a vision. Ani Daniel, me, Daniel, after the early one that had appeared to me. And in this vision, I see, I was in the Shushan Habira, the capital city of Shushan. Asher Be'elam. Now, here we're given another piece of information about Shushan. It was in the region, the much broader region of Elam. That would be like saying Wyoming is in the United States of America. Shushan is in Elam. Elam HaMedina, this broad region of Elam. I saw in a vision. Vani hayiti al uval ulai. And I was standing on the banks of a river called Ulai. Uval here being another term for a tributary or a body of water, in the way that Yuval is a river. Uval is a play on that. Yud and Aleph are interchanged. And so all of the translations, the Targumim, and the commentaries understand that Daniel is on a body of water called Ulai. Now, this is helpful in trying to understand where the Alshich is coming from with his idea of a river running through and separating between Shushan Habira and Ha'ir Shushan. Recall the Arkoma Demaya that he mentions here. So Daniel is our biblical textual pin, if you will, for the idea of this river. Add to this another textual pin, less, let's say, powerful, but still evocative, that we see in the book of Esther, Megillat Esther itself, that also alludes to this river that's separating between Shushan Habira and Ha'ir Shushan. Let's look together at the 4th chapter of Esther. Vatomer Esther la'ashiv al Mordechai. After Esther gets wind of the terrible decree of Achashverosh and Haman, and Mordechai has responded to that with great mourning, and they have their conversation, she relays the message to him as follows. Lech knos et kol haYehudim hanimtzeim b'Shushan. Go and gather all the Jews gathered in Shushan. V'tzumu alai. V'al tochlu v'al tishtu shloshet yamim laila bayom. By the way, I was taught that Shushan, when you just see Shushan, we're talking about Shushan, Ha'ir Shushan, not Shushan Habira. V'al tishtu shloshet yamim laila bayom. Gam ani v'narotai atzum ken. Uv'chein avo el hamelach asher lo kedat. V'kasher avadati avadati. So she says, this is the plan, and I ask you to go and gather all of the Jews to fast on my behalf so that I may be successful. Vaya'avor Mordechai. And Mordechai passed. Vayas k'chol asher tzata alav Esther. And he did all that Esther had commanded him to do. Now, these are redundant words, but then very, very, like I said, evocative, very powerful. Vaya'avor Mordechai, we could do away with. We could have just had a verse that says, Vayas k'chol asher tzata alav Esther, and he did all that Esther had commanded him. But Vayavor Mordechai, and Mordechai passed, must indicate something, at least in the eyes of our commentators and our sages. And so when we have this running midrash in Mesachet Megillah, of Megillat Esther, we have a machloket between Rav and Shmuel as to what Vayavor Mordechai could possibly mean. Vayavor Mordechai Amar Rav. Now the first explanation given is the ultimate drash. Understand this entirely conceptually, entirely figuratively. Mordechai did an avera. Vayavor Rav Amar Rav. Rav says Shehe'evir Yom Rishon Shel Pesach b'Ta'anit, that he transgressed or he passed. The translation here is he passed the first day of Pesach in fast, in the sense of transgression, because one is not allowed to fast on Pesach. So he was willing to transgress Pesach because it was so critical for him to fast on behalf of Esther's possibility of saving the Jewish people. Shmuel Amar. Shmuel is like, no, you got it all wrong. Davar akuma demaya. What it means is that he passed over a body of water. So if we're asking the Alshich, who's I would say an Achron, right? If he's in the 16th century, where is he getting this idea of a body of water separating between Shushan Habira and Ha'ir Shushan? Well, his source is Misechet Megillah, which mentions for the first time this idea of Arkoma Demaya, which in turn is based on this strange language in Megillat Esther, Vayavor Mordechai, which is in sync or complements this vision that Daniel has where he's in Shushan and he's on the banks of a river, right? Shushan in a place called Elam, which we'll return to in just one bit. I want to forget about that. Now, let's pause for a second and take a look at the realia of Shushan. This is a picture that was taken, I'm blowing it up for us all here, in 1935, I believe. And that was just when Susa, or Shush, as it's known now, which is, I think it's close to Tehran. Maybe it's in Iran, definitely. But I don't know that it's close to Tehran, but it's in the modern day country of Iran. And it was excavated in the early 20th century. And specifically, the Acropolis of Susa was excavated because here is where the palace of Susa, from the Persian Empire, from Cyrus and on, Susa was developed along with Persepolis as one of the main cities of the Persian Empire in the days of Xerxes of Ahasuerus, the capital city. He moved his capital from Persepolis to Susa. And so this whole area was excavated, and the Susa gates, those famous gates, were then taken. I believe the British excavated, but I'm not sure. So they're either going to be in the British Museum or the Louvre. Someone can weigh in on that. I would imagine that they're in one of those two museums. But this is where they excavated the palace. What you see here is Kever Daniel, this strange cone-like structure, the grave of Daniel, which, as you see, is on the bank of a river. Now, this entire area, which was subsequently populated, here it looks quite sparse, but it was subsequently populated as Iran developed, would have been Ha'ir Shushan, as they did a few excavations, not as systematic or as scientific as archaeologists would have liked, because archaeologists in the main would focus here. And then as archaeology developed and was more interested in how the regular people lived, this whole area was already too developed to excavate fully. And so this whole area, which now looks like this, as you can see, this is a picture from 2023. And you can see here the Kever of Daniel. And here's the Arkoma Demaya that Shmuel was talking about. And he knew of what he spoke. And the Alshich, by extension, was correct geographically here, that here this whole area would have been Shushan Habira, and this, which is now developed here, which again is this area over here, is Ha'ir Shushan. So there actually was an Arkoma Demaya, and I think it's fair to posit that Mordechai, the court Jew, Vayavor Mordechai, would actually have had to have crossed over to get back to Ha'ir Shushan in order to deliver the news. I'll before we move any further, I'll point you back here. I'll direct you to the poetic irony, I guess, or the wonder of Shushan and the entire Purim story being based in Elam, a word Ayin Lamed Mem, which encapsulates everything that is hidden. Liot ne'elam means to be hidden, or to be shrouded in mystery. So the place itself, the place name carries that same concept of Vanochi Haster Astir. Okay. Moving along. What I didn't say at the beginning of this year, I always forget, and it comes to me in the middle, is that this entire shiur is based on a ma'amar by Rav Aryeh Handler. I should have started with that, who wrote a wonderful sefer, Chen Makom, which is a sefer that deals with the deeper concept of place. He is the Rosh Yeshiva of the Hesder Yeshiva in Ramleh, and unfortunately, the book is not in circulation. I think I own the last few copies of it. But he is the one who had developed for me this idea of the two types of Shushan, the two names of Shushan, and what that might reflect. So far, what we have is in the Megillah, we have Shushan Habira and Ha'ir Shushan. We have noticed that they seem to reflect different parts of what Shushan is, and that there is a river that runs through them and separates between the two parts of Shushan, Shushan Habira and Ha'ir Shushan. Now, with that, and with those tantalizing bits that I threw out from Masechet Chulin and from the Maharal and the Zohar, the idea of the possibility of a deeper meaning, of reading more deeply into the events and the language of the Megillah and finding God there. Let's see what Rabbi Yonatan Eifshitz tells us about the way that Shushan is structured in this duality. We have to try and understand what the Megillah is trying to teach us with the idea of this river, or of Mordechai potentially crossing. Was he crossing a river or not? But it's understood from this idea that there is only one Jew who was allowed in Shushan Habira. And just as the Ibn Ezra had written, the Chalek bin Shushan Habira, the Shushan, that we're dealing with two different regions, two different parts of Shushan, Shushan Habira and Ha'ir Shushan. Ki Shushan Habira hainu armon hamelech. Shushan Habira is the palace. V'shama lo yashvu Yehudim rak Mordechai levado. And there were no Jews there, only Mordechai alone as the court Jew. V'hinei lefnei Shushan Habira shehu armon haya nahar sheshmo uval ulai. And adjacent to Shushan Habira, which was the palace, there was a river that was named Uval Ulai, the same river that Daniel stood on the banks of. Kidichti b'Daniel, v'ani b'Shushan Habira al nahar Uval Ulai. V'imken haya anar mafsik ben armon l'ha'ir. So Rav Yonatan Eifshitz spells this out very, very clearly. What he himself, I believe, never saw with his own eyes, but we can see before us, plain as day, there are two parts to Shushan separated by this river. And Daniel, who was buried next to the river, at least according to some traditions, stood in his lifetime on the bank of this river. Now, to get to the deeper concept of why we have this duality, why we have Shushan Habira and Ha'ir Shushan, and why I was introducing those ideas of Hamelech and Malchuta De'ara, the earthly realm, paralleling Malchuta Derakia. Let's see how Rav Handler puts it. Hitgalut Kisei Malchuto Shel Haborei, the revelation, the manifestation of the divine throne of the creator of the world. Be'avro Sheni Shel Hanahar, on the other side of the river, on the other side of the tracks, one can say. Ba'a mitoch Esther. It comes through hiddenness. There is a fundamental difference between Shushan Habira and Ha'ir Shushan. Shushan Habira representing Malchuta Derakia, Shushan Habira representing the divine realm, representing all that is clear, all that is evident, where decrees are enacted, and Ha'ir Shushan representing Malchuta Da'ara, representing our earthly experience Olam hazeh, this world, where the decrees are effected. The situation of the nation of Israel, who were spread out and scattered throughout all of the provinces of Achashverosh, it expresses, or it realizes the revelation of the throne of God in Elam, in the place that is hidden. The actions of Mordechai are intended, expressed to change this, to change the separation between Shushan Habira and Ha'ir Shushan, to change this essential division between the heavenly realms and the earthly realms. Mordechai over Shushan Habira, Mordechai crosses over, he bridges the place of Shushan Habira, Ir HaMalchut, the court, El Ha'ir Shushan, over to the city of Shushan. He is the one who is able to translate between these worlds, to bridge between these worlds. Bekach mistamelat ha'avarat hamhalech Eloki shel malchut derakia el olam ha'ester shel Ha'ir Shushan. As Rav Hedler puts it, he essentially symbolizes the transition or the transmission from the divine realms, Malchut Derakia, Shushan Habira, to that which is murky and ambiguous and unclear, all that which happens in Ha'ir Shushan. Chasifat Malchut Shamayim Zo b'Malchut Da'ara, the exposure of the divine realm in the earthly realm, moving from Malchut Derakia, the Shushan Habira, over to Ha'ir Shushan, Malchut Da'ara, Atida lahotzi et Megillah mitoch levushei ha'hester shehi mitatefet bahem. It's a beautiful line that he says here. He's saying that that through bridging from Malchuta Derakia to Malchuta Da'ara, through bridging from Shushan Habira to Ha'ir Shushan, is the work of removing the Megillah. Removing Megillah literally means a scroll, that which is wrapped, that which is onto itself, that which is hidden, from the bounds or from the bindings, the dressing of the mystery, of the hiddenness that it is wrapped up into. It's a very poetic way of saying that that the work of Purim essentially is the bridging of this river Uval Ulai, is the movement from the divine realm, from that which we have very little access to. Only Ishu di Yechidi, only Mordechai had access to where the decree is carried out, to Vahir Shushan Navocha, to the place of bewilderment, to the place of great distress, to the place of great doubt and uncertainty and ambiguity, as we try to tease out and make sense of the world around us. We are not privy to Shushan Habira, to Malchut Derakia, to those realms that are on the other side of the river. He goes on to say, to explain a teaching of the Gra, of the Vilna Gaon, who extraordinarily takes the verse from Daniel and says, the river is named Ulai. It's astounding. Of all the names that the river could have been given, the river is named Ulai, which means but, or maybe. It's an expression of uncertainty. It's an expression of doubt. And let's see what he says. The element of God that we call the Shekhinah, which means the revelation of God in this world, it symbolizes when God is revealed in this world. However we might experience that, we can experience at a national level. We can look at, manifest examples, manifold examples, and specific examples. One can say from very recent events. I guess the classic example in recent history is the Six-Day War, but I think that over the last few months we can also point to the the closest we are going to get to what's called a nes galoi, to an overt miracle. Hama'avar mi malchuta derakia, the passage from malchuta derakia, Shushan Habira, la malchuta da'ara, to this world, symbolized by Ha'ir Shushan, hu ma'avar me'olam shel vada'ut, it's the passage from a world of certainty, a world of utmost clarity, a world of utmost truth, לעולם של ספקות הנובעים כתוצאה מההסדר הקיים במציאות העולמית, over to a world of doubt that emerge from the experience of this world of being in ambiguity, of being in uncertainty, of being in unclarity, and having bechira, and having choice as to how we choose to interpret the world around us. Uvalulai, the river Ulai, Hamafrid ben Shtei Malchuyot, that separates between Shushan Habira, Malchuta Derakia, with Ha'ir Shushan, Malchuta Da'ara, Misamel Bishmo, et Hashinoi Hanotzar Ketotza'a min Ha'ma'avar. It symbolizes through its very name the change that happens when the decree leaves the heavenly realm, leaves Shushan Habira, and then is effected, is carried out in the earthly realm. When there is that disconnect between Malchuta Derakia and Malchuta Da'ara. And what he alludes to here is not something that's mentioned explicitly by the Gra, but I think is quite evident. Not only is the name of the river Ulai, but of all of the terms that could have been used in Sefer Daniel to indicate river, Nahar, Yuval, those are the typical terms for Nachal. These are the terms that are much, much more common in Tanakh to indicate a river. A hapax legamina, an extremely rare word, which I don't believe is anywhere else in Tanakh, is uval, is, as we saw here with Daniel, I'll bring it up again, va'ani hayiti al uval ulai, and I was on the tributary of the river Ulai. Why was this word chosen, uval ulai? I think it is abundantly clear that uval captures within it that same doubt and uncertainty as ulai. If the name of the river is ulai, the river of doubt, the river that separates between Shushan Habira and Ha'ir Shushan, where Ha'ir Shushan Navocha, because they have no idea what's going on in Shushan Habira, or this world is constantly bewildered because we have no idea what to make of our existence and of our reality and of the ever-shifting events around us, then the river that is separating between the world of Vada'ut, the world of certainty and of truth, must be named Uval Ulai, carrying with it, through both of its terms, Uval and Ulai, that meaning of doubt and uncertainty. I'm going to shift now to every time you look at a selection from Rav Kook or the Pachad Yitzchak, his Talmud, there's the words themselves. I am not a native Hebrew speaker, so I can't hear the poetry as naturally as a native Hebrew speaker, but I would like to try and transmit in this format, to the best of my ability, some of that beauty. So we'll look at how Rav Kook frames this idea in his inimitable fashion, and which again I think is picked up strongly by the Pachad Yitzchak, where he will seamlessly weave together various different verses from the Bible or references in the Talmud or in Sifrei Chazal that he just expects everyone to have familiarity with, but he does it in such a poetic way that even for those like me who aren't native Hebrew speakers, it carries through. Havadai hamuchlat shochen barom olam b'chavyon oz ha'atid lavo. This basically he's bringing in so many different references to the same concept. The absolute certainty which dwells on high in the strongest sense, the world to come, olam haba, eheyeh asher eheyeh, havadai shmo ken tihilato, vadai stami. Simple, perfect, pure truth and certainty. There is that existence that we call Olam Haba, Atid Lavo, Shushan Habira. Nachalim Rabim Mitpardim Mimenu. Many rivers stretch out from this Vadai Stami. Kulam Ochazim Zebaza, all of them intertwine and interweave with each other. Ad Boam the Nahar Ulai. Hulihai Vulai, Uvalulai, Viuvalulai. Until they arrive at our river that runs through Shushan, Uvalulai. So all the rivers that are emanating from the Vadai Shmo Ken Tihilato, all intertwine with each other until they arrive at this river of doubt. B'chol ha'olam, b'chol ish, olet tamid ba'alito midat vada'uto. Throughout the entire world, within every person, he will always have this certainty within him. V'nachal ulai mitchaber hu im hanachal hayotze me'eden. But the river of doubt will join in with the river that emerges from Eden, miyesod habadaut, from the foundation of all that is certain. V'kulam yachad shoavim l'shad chayehem, mimekar kol habadauyot, umimekar kol hasfekot. And every single one of us draw over the course of our lives from the source of all certainty and from the source of all doubt. I have to sit with that for a bit, and I have it here for you in the Daf Mekorot to sit with, as I think a prime text leading into the Inyana Diyoma of the Moed of Purim, because it encapsulates, at least for me, the existential situation of knowing that there is a Shushan Habira and living in Ha'ir Shushan, and understanding that we attempt to bridge the Uval Ulai, especially on Purim, when we search out Hamelech in the Megillah, and when we search out the Hitgalut in Megillat Esther, we try to find God within Megillat Esther, where he is not manifest, because in Ha'ir Shushan, he is never manifest. And the words of Rav Kook are a great comfort to me, reminding me that there is within all of us, as much as we are uncertain and as much as we may have doubts, there is also the source of all Vadaut within us.
Does it ever mention the use of the word Ulai by the slave of Abraham?
Not that I don't know in terms of different references to Ulai throughout Tanakh. But Ulai is the word that transmits to us the idea of possibilities, of lack of certainty.
But
so
it's amazing that it defines Yitzchak, who is also by Rav Hutner called Pachad Yitzchak.
Pachad Yitzchak, yes. Definitely. Yeah. Let me think on that. And at the end of the shiur, maybe we can talk about it a little bit more. I just have one final thought of the idea of Shushan and Shushan Habira specifically. So up until now, just to summarize what we've been discussing, the Megillah describes Shushan in two ways, Shushan Habira and Ha'ir Shushan. And this symbolizes, at least in the thinking of the Maharal, and developed by Rava Hendler, and other sources that we've seen, the concept of the duality of Malchuta Derakia and Malchuta Da'ara, the river that separates them being called Uvalulai, is that river of doubt that Mordechai manages to cross, and essentially is the conceptual crossing that we're all trying to achieve in our lives, as we in Ha'ir Shushan try to move from Ha'ir Shushan Navocha to Ha'ir Shushan Tzala V'Samecha, and not allow that river to block us off from access to Shushan Habira, to the Malchuta Derakia, and to accessing God where he is not manifestly found. The same idea carries over into another fascinating detail regarding Bayit Sheni, because we're in the Purim period is a period of attempting to rebuild the Beit HaMikdash. The building process was stymied over the course of the early Persian period. It was picked up by the second king Darius and allowed to continue on. But in the description of the second Beit HaMikdash, in the Mishnayot of Mesechet Midot, we find a description of the gates leading onto Har HaBayit. And you can see here 5 gates. Chamisha Sharim Hayu Lahar HaBayit. This is the second Beit HaMikdash, dedicated in 516 BCE, if we want to count exactly 70 years from the destruction of the first temple, and Chanukah HaBayit, the inauguration of the second temple. This is what the temple would have ostensibly looked like, with 5 access points. Chamisha Sharim Hayu Lahar HaBayit, Shnei Sharei Chuldam Min HaDarom. For those of you who have gone and seen the 2 gates, which from Herod's complex, those were way before Herod. There would have been Sharei Chulda as well. Mishamshin Knisa V'Yitzia, Kiponos Min HaMa'arav, Mishamesh Knisa V'Yitzia, Kadi Min HaTzafon, Lo Haya Mishamesh Klum. Shar HaMizrachi, this is the one I'd like to focus on, the Eastern Gate. The Eastern Gate, if you stand on the Mount of Olives, which is to the east of the Temple Mount, and you know there's the Kidron Valley that's separating between the Temple Mount, Har HaBayit, and the Mount of Olives, and you look towards Har HaBayit, then you'll see a sealed gate. Shar Mizrachi Alav Shushan Habirat Surah. This originally was known as Shar Shushan. This was the Eastern Gate, and there was an engraving or an inscription that depicted Shushan HaBirah, the capital city of Persia. Shebo Kohen Gadol HaSoref et HaPara, Upara B'chol Misadeha Yotzim Lahar Mishcha. So when the high priest had to burn the Para Aduma, whose ashes were necessary to release Tumat HaMet, that whole ceremony happened on Har HaZeitim, and so he had to exit from the east gate to get over to Har HaZeitim. So you can kind of imagine in your mind's eye where Shar Shushan is standing. The Rambam is explaining why we have an inscription, an engraving of Shushan HaBirah on this gate. Shalume Shushan HaBirah lebinyan Beit HaMikdash. It's a very rational explanation he gives. When they built the second temple and they were in the height of the Persian regime, Shayu b'mei Ezra, Tzivaotam HaMelech sheyasu tzurat HaMedina ketzurat Shushan HaBirah. So the king said, you all need to make sure you know who's in charge. It's fine for you to have a temple. Just make sure that you know who you really have to fear, right? Who you really should be fearing is Shushan HaBirah, is the Persian king, and he's symbolized by his capital city of Susa, so that you don't rebel against him. Make sure his stamp is there on the temple. And now, a specific aspect of this gate, which is a very interesting, which is delivered to us in a very interesting Mishnah in Mishnayot Kelim, is in the gate itself, there were housed 2 measuring sticks called an amma. And Ushtei amot hayu b'Shushan HaBirah. There were 2 measurements in Shushan HaBirah, meaning somewhere in maybe like a little vestibule or in a chamber, in an inner chamber of this eastern gate of the temple. Achad al Karen Mizrachit Tzfonit, v'achad al Karen Mizrachit Dromit. So one in the northeastern corner and one in the southeastern corner of the gate leading eastward. Now, there was a standard amma from the days of Moshe Rabbeinu, and one of these amot measurements, imagine like a stick or something of that nature, would have been slightly more, and one would have been slightly less than the standard measurement of Moshe. So the reason why they had to have these 2 amot is to avoid a serious transgression called mi'ilah. Mi'ilah means essentially stealing or taking from the temple treasury, taking from something that essentially belongs to God, and you cannot take from the temple treasury. And so the workers who would have to measure out their materials would make sure that when they went in to when they took the material out, there was always less than what was brought in, so that you would avoid Megillat. When they had to take the raw materials out, they would take out less, and they would bring in more to make sure that they didn't transgress Megillah. And on this idea, and we're wrapping up the shiur now, but on this idea, the Tosfot Anshe Shem have the following to say. It's a commentary on this Mishnah. There were these 2 amot measurements. Why specifically was it in this gate? Why were these 2 amot in Shar Shushan Habira? That as they were looking up and they saw, oh yes, the symbol of Persia, I have to remember who rules me and who's really in charge. Yazkiru that they be reminded that Shushan Habira is the symbol of Malchuta Da'ara. It's a symbol of the heavenly throne. But who are we really beholden to? Malchuta Dirakia, the divine throne. And so specifically, these 2 amot were kept in the gate of Shushan Habira. That as much as we might be in control of a specific, or under the authority of a specific earthly regime or earthly kingdom, who is truly in charge? Shushan Habira, which symbolizes, as I tried to develop throughout this shiur, Malchuta Dirakia, which symbolizes who is truly in charge, the Borei Olam HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and who we must take care not to ever steal from in the case of these amot in the Beit HaMikdash. I'll end this shiur with a pasuk in Yechezkel, and then I will wrap up as a quick summary. Yechezkel, in his vision of the Shekhinah, the presence of God, eventually re-entering the world, La'atid Lavo, when the world once again becomes a place of ultimate vadaut, or at least the vadaut hamuchletet, the experience of certainty, and the experience of conquering our doubt, and the experience of truth, because something becomes something more accessible. It becomes easier for us to cross that uvalulai. Then the Shekhinah, remarkably, Yechezkel tells us, enters via that closed gate, the gate that when you go to Har Zitim, you see is sealed and closed, and the gate that's meant to remain closed until HaKadosh Baruch Hu re-enters the world. And when he re-enters the world, it will be through that closed gate, highly symbolic of the Ilam of Megillat Esther, symbolic of the entire Megillah, symbolic of Hamelech, who remains shrouded in the ambiguity of not being named in the Megillah. But bo la'atid lavo, Rashi points out to us, and I'll just read the pasuk, babo, that the ish lo yavobo ki Hashem Elokei Yisrael babo. The gate should remain sealed until we are able to bridge this uvalulai between Shushan Habira and Hayir Shushan, between the Malchuta Dirakia and the Malchuta Da'ara. So I'll just end the shiur with wishing everyone a Purim Sameach, a Freilich in Purim, and that may we all this year be able to affect the inner Mordechai within. And Vayavor Mordechai, and just as Mordechai passed over from Malchuta Dirakia to Malchuta Da'ara and back with the ease, that he had, so too we should be able to bridge the Olam Shel Sfeikot, the Ha'ir Shushan, and try and achieve some of that beautiful those waters that Rav Kook talks about, the Nachal of the Nahar Hayotze Me Eden, the Miyasod HaVadaut, to draw from those as well. So I thank you so much for joining me in this shiur. I have one more thing to say before I open up for any questions, and it's as follows. If I have just completed a manuscript on Sefer Shoftim, which is for those who have enjoyed the type of shiurim that I give, it's very much in that same model of looking at the deeper patterns within Sefer Shoftim as the nexus point of Am Yisrael's development as they grow through their adolescence. It's the period of adolescence of Am Yisrael. I do not have any readers, except for my wonderful husband and a couple of close friends. And I am really looking for readers before I start considering where to take this book on the next step. If any of you may have any time to read over a couple of chapters, I would greatly appreciate it. So I can gauge how the reading experience is, and I can hear and I can get feedback. So if you do have any interest in reading a couple of chapters, or even one chapter, or even a small section of a chapter, and you would do me the great honor to do so, then please be in touch with me. I'll leave my email address again in the comments. Please reach out, and I would be greatly appreciative. And I wish everyone a Purim Sameach. Okay, now let me get to, here we go. Okay. I just want to make sure everyone can see my contact. Okay. The name Esther is a loan word. Yes. From Ishtar. Yes. Washington, D.C. versus Capitol Hill. Yes. 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 Ha'ir Shushan versus Shushan Habira. Right. So in Dvarim, God is saying, I will be Esther. I will act in the guise of Esther. Yes. Yes, Ruth. Yes. So Anochi Haster Astir. I will absolutely that you all that you will have to seek me out. I will not be manifest. Yes, Carol. Ulai, absolutely. I'm glad you foresaw that. I see before I brought it up. Yes. Yes, fits with Megillah and Torah being only books that will be after the final redemption, as you point out. That's also a teaching of the Arizal, that the only Sefer and the only Chag that will remain relevant, La'atid Lavo, will be Megillat Esther and Chag Purim. Astounding. The duality of Megillah being scroll and a letter. Yes, something hidden and something that is transmitted. How is Uval uncertainty? Uval Aleph Bet Lamed Aval. Uval itself doesn't mean that, but the choice of Aleph instead of Yud to convey river, Uval instead of Yuval, I believe was extremely deliberate to really drive home the point of the uncertainty. Uval, Ulai. Thank you, Deborah. Both Avar explanations fit with bridge of the two realms, since with Pesach Hashem brings the divine into history. I did not think about that. Thank you. Vayavor. Yes, my mind is not on Pesach, but I'll have to register that and think about that more deeply when it comes to Pesach. Thank you.
But they say that's when it took place, right? We do have textual basis for that it was.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, because it was that the lots were cast on Yud Daled Nisan. Mordechai heard about it immediately, and so the Midrash says that we'll say that this all happened over the first few days of Pesach, but textually, yes, we're on the eve of Pesach, Yud Daled Nisan. The Eved Abraham uses the word ulai when alluding to Yitzchak. Is this the pachad of Yitzchak? The pachad of Yitzchak meaning the uncertainty. Gershon, I have to think about that more, because because Yitzchak I always understood as the Av of Din and the Av of a certain certainty. I don't know. I have to think more about that idea. But okay, if anyone else has any questions, so let me jot that down, because I never thought in that direction. If anyone else has any questions. And if not, okay. So thank you all for coming. Purim Sameach. And I hope that we can remain in touch.
תודה רבה.
Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach.